Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate it. For those of us joining us, we want to thank you for joining us. We want to let you know that we're a little short of material. So we decided to fake a technology issue so we don't have to fill as much of the void. Like Tracy said, I'm fortunate to be on this with two really experienced folks in the commercial real estate business, which I'm going to introduce right now. First with us, we have Dave Schwartz, who biography and background on Dave. Dave is a CPA, holds a BA in economics. He also has a master's degree in accounting. He started his career with Price Waterhouse in Milwaukee. He then moved on to become the CFO and executive vice president of two different commercial real estate, retail design build firms. In 1991, he formed Innovative Construction Solutions to focus specifically on this retail sector. Today, he continues to work on budgeting, design, and value engineering for retail projects across the United States. Next, we have David Israel. David Israel is the president of the Learsey Company, which was founded in 1981. It is based in Northbrook, Illinois. Over his career has been involved with over 50 retail developments, focusing primarily on value shopping centers. In 1987, he began working on his first retail development in Wisconsin, and to date has redeveloped 15 different centers in the state. He still holds 9 properties in Wisconsin, primarily in the mid-block sector. And for those who don't know me, I'm Tom Bruff. I am the least experienced and least important on this crew, but I'm going to act as the moderator and pass some questions around. But I'm with Founders 3. And I've been in the retail brokerage business for 25 years. Started my career with Commercial Property Associates. We merged with Siegel Gallagher and RFP Commercial.
I'm getting a lot of reverberation.
Starting Founders 3. We work with various national, regional, and local tenants, as well as a variety of local and national developers and landlords. So, like I said, we're going to try to keep this. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of reverberation.
We're gonna, like I said, I'm gonna act as moderator. I'm going to be throwing some questions out to the other panelists, and from there, we're gonna go for about 30.
Can you hear me? What? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Hold on a second. Do we have a problem, David?
I'm getting a bunch of reverberation. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Dave Schwartz, are you getting that too?
Yeah, I'm hearing that. I'm wondering, Tom, do you still have phone and computer connected? Maybe that's what's feeding back.
Mine is off. Okay.
All right,
well, I'm sure Sam is listening. And Sam, if there's something you can do, let us know. If you want us to stop, go ahead. But I think the best thing we do is just kind of press through here. All right, well, really good. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. First question is for you, David Israel. You reside in Chicago and Florida, and yet you've done developments in a lot of multiple states. But it seems like you're doing primarily a lot of work up here in Wisconsin. What's the reason for that?
Well, we always found that working in Wisconsin was a very, very business-friendly state. Most of the time, the municipalities are really happy to see us come in and see a piece of property being redeveloped instead of sitting vacant, or just have no piece of property there. The other reason I like Wisconsin, two reasons, is one, it's also a very stable state. In the recession, we didn't see the highs or the lows from the recessions that we saw in other areas. Normally, Wisconsin was pretty stable. We didn't see the high and low, but it was more contained. Another reason I like working in Wisconsin is because I think the real estate taxes are fair in Wisconsin. You go to Cook County or Lake County or DuPage, and you're going to see taxes 2, 3, 4 times more than you're going to see in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, a lot of our deals are $2 a foot, for real estate taxes. And in Cook County, you could see $6, $8, $9. I had deals in Cook County where it was $9, $10. I couldn't release the spaces after the original tenant moved out because the real estate taxes were there. Part of doing all these deals is to make sure that the deals work, the economics work. The tenants, no matter how much you get in base rent, also have to factor in their CAM and taxes, and it's a gross number that's got to be factored into. So those are some of the reasons. One other reason is because you can get things done quicker there. You can get permits done, you can get zoning done quicker. It's just a friendlier state, and people are glad to see you come in and be spending money in their community.
Very good. No, thanks. And that's a point I was going to talk about later too, and that is I've never seen triple net charges as high as they've been for and specifically a lot of smaller shopping centers. The taxes have gone so high where we're seeing $12 to $13 total in triple net charges, which, as it screws up the whole deal. It just increases the occupancy cost too much. Mr. Schwartz, every year, from a broker standpoint, we're reaching out to our retailers. When we get their reports, and there are a lot of numbers of what they are going to open across the country. It's really up to us to try to get as many, to work together with the construction folks and the developers to get as many of those retailers to do those deals in our states. The question I have for you is, how do we compare cost-wise, with other states, and then specifically around the state of Wisconsin? How do we compare, with other states, and are there things that we can do to differentiate ourselves from other markets?
Well, I think David talked about some of the things that we differentiate from an intangible standpoint, from a direct cost standpoint. Obviously, Milwaukee's a metro area. Costs are, they're in that mid-range. We'll take a Milwaukee cost, and we will travel throughout the central United States. But from a cost standpoint, certainly less than the Chicago area, certainly less than Minneapolis, and those metro areas. So we do have, from a construction cost standpoint, I think we've at least got a consistency. We've also got a predictability in those costs. We haven't seen those bigger transitions of costs over time. We also have a lot of the side costs from a development standpoint as we go out. We're working out east with a client right now, and some of what we see from a cost standpoint there on the entitlement side, skip the construction when you've got all the soft costs that you're dealing with. We see soft costs and the predictability of just doing a deal and when that opening can be a great factor in favor of Wisconsin over what it might be in some other states. We've got deals that are taking months and, bordering on a year just to get through from all the approval processes and so forth, and then getting to the entitlement costs to go along with. So some of the side costs beyond just the straight construction costs are things that I think are differentiators, bringing utilities to site and so forth. There aren't those entities that are sitting waiting in the background to add on the cost to the overall construction of the project.
It kind of along those lines, when we go through, whether it was the recession in 2008, or what we're going through now with COVID, I think, when we come out of this thing, there's the expectation in the community that, whether it's real estate costs, but specifically construction costs, that people are going to be able to find deals, that, there's going to be less work to be done, and, they're going to be able to build less expensively. What's the reality in that?
Right now, I think everybody's sitting there going, boy, costs should have just taken a dive right now, and they have not. Part of what we're seeing right now, and I talked to our estimating group this morning, we're seeing that people are making up for lost time now. Over the last 3, 4, 5 months, they've had projects that were delayed, deferred, or whatever, and now there's that rush to get projects done before winter sets in. So right at this moment, there are people busy. Not in every trade, not every subcontractor is busy. So we're seeing people with an expectation that things are going to fall off. So we're seeing an active bidding group from subcontractors, but we haven't seen prices really take a dive. We'll see pockets, but I wouldn't say we've seen anything that would say bet that 10% costs are going to go down 10%. There isn't anything driving material costs down. In fact, lumber prices have just spiked because you've got the housing market that's going along, and you've got, to a certain extent, we've seen some supply industries that had down periods. And so their material supply is somewhat off from what it would be. So they've got a little advantage of almost an induced supply shortage in some cases. So, so lumber prices are up. We got a steel notice today that said we're only holding price for 15 days. That's a one-off, but it gives some indication that we're not expecting steel prices to go down. And from a labor standpoint, I'm not sure we ever get over the general shortage of labor that has occurred over time, just coming out of 2009, 2010, and so forth. I'm not sure we ever made up for that totally. And right now, there's probably a pretty good balance, but there isn't such a oversupply of labor that we've seen prices come down from a bid standpoint from subcontractors yet. I think there may be a gap, a window this winter, but we think there's some pent-up demand for next spring. So I think if there's a gap and a down, it's going to be short-lived. I don't think it's going to be an extended one for what we see at this point. Now, if we've got another shutdown and that drags it out, maybe so, but nothing right now that projects out.
Excellent. Mr. Israel, you talked about some of the factors that have made the climate in Wisconsin beneficial for developers, but that process can always be made better. And part of the audience, part is also includes, a lot of municipal leaders. And I guess, I'd like to ask you the question, what advice would you give to these municipalities that could kind of further make this process easier and more efficient?
There are a few points that we can talk. First of all, cooperation is very important between getting your zoning, getting your permits, being happy to see you get your deals done. Timing is also a very critical issue. Like Dave said, all these tenants, it could take 3 to 6 months to potentially put a deal together. And as soon as the deal's together, they want to be in tomorrow. So timing is also a really critical issue to try and get, people in and work with to get your permitting so you can get started. In today's world, municipalities have to understand that there's a shortage of tenants out there. Retail tenants are shrinking. They're shrinking. You see the restaurant and entertainment venues are basically going to be gone. And God knows when they're coming back, but they're not going to be there. So if you have a deal in hand, you have to get that deal done. And the question is, everybody's got to work together to try and get that deal done so the deal can happen. The other thing is maybe potentially doing a TIF. If the cities are available to make they provide a TIF for the center or for the deal that they're doing, it can make the deal a starter versus a non-starter because the numbers are so, in many cases, so hard to get. The retailers are going to pay a certain amount of dollars and that's it. You got to fit in that box, and if you can't fit in that box, they're not paying you more money. So I think potentially doing that. The other thing is that we've seen, I've seen in some of my centers where people want to buy boxes. They want to buy a box in a center. They want to buy the middle box because it's vacant and they want to own it. So another thing you got to take a look at is maybe doing, potentially subdividing that or doing a CSM to make it work. In any business, you want a bunch of options. We don't have a bunch of options. So whatever options you have to take advantage of to make it work. And I think those are some of the things that can potentially work for municipalities to work with us to try and make the deals work.
Well, and Tom, if I could inject, one of the things really, the sooner that municipalities and developers and retailers can be talking together, because a lot of things that we see that all parties have to be willing to accept. We're talking about reuse of existing facilities. All parties have to be more willing to accept what's there and accept small incremental changes and improvements. If they go, boy, that's an old center, boy, if we can start over again. At the point that we're affording to start over again, we can't afford getting the deal done because there's a understanding that, well, it's existing space and therefore there should be a lower lease rate that attaches to it and so forth. But if the costs are equivalent to what a new construction is at that point, by the time the site's reworked and the building's reworked, it presses the deal away. And so the earlier there can be good, honest communication between the communities and the developer and the retailers to figure out how to truly reuse what's there as opposed to totally reinvent and start over again. That's something that we don't see that. All parties want to, but they don't really get there. And so I think this next level, the next year or two, the best way that things are going to get reused is to be able to put our heads together to figure out how to truly reuse as much of what's there as opposed to starting over again.
Hey, Tom, I got a question for you. Challenges in re-tenanting property days from both the tenant side and the landlord side.
You broke up a little bit, David, but I think most of you asked what challenges there were for re-tenanting some of these properties from a brokerage standpoint. Okay.
Yeah, the brokerage side, both on the landlord side and the tenant side.
Okay. Well, I think you touched on a little bit of it, and that is, it's somewhat of a supply problem from a retailer standpoint. We've got this glut of, mid to large box space, and we've got categories of retailers that are shrinking. And so we just, so when we sit down on our, our spreadsheets and we start to look at, all right, who are the appropriate people to go to fill these boxes? We just have less and less people that are doing deals or from that, or are just sitting on their hands right now, and they're just not willing to come to the table. I think the other main hurdle, which is going to affect both parties, and that's cost. It's a cost and it's a revenue problem. A lot of these retailers prior to COVID, they were seeing some erosion in their revenue numbers. Controls, there's been a lot of articles about them and what has happened prior to COVID. I mean, when COVID occurred, their sales went down 80%. There's been a lot of people in their segments, but because of that, and what's happening with some of the other things that we touched on with construction costs either remaining stagnant or even going up, the real estate costs are going up. It's much more difficult for a landlord to repurpose a box or for that matter come out of the ground. And on the other side, if the retailers are doing less volume, they can pay less. And now they're looking at triple net charges that are being pushed up because of taxes and other reasons. It really becomes cumbersome to try to bring these parties together. So I think those are kind of the main points of that.
And Tom, to push back on or to go forward from what you're saying, we see that very much in the last 6 months. The good news is, on a positive basis, we've provided budgets to clients for, I think we tallied up 60 to 70 different retailers, boxes, whatever. They could be one-off, they could be multiples and so forth. This is throughout the central, call it the 7-state area around Wisconsin. The challenge is a lot of the boxes we're seeing and asked to budget into are 250 feet deep with 100 to 175 foot deep tenants. And so that matchup, as you say, as the retailers have gotten smaller and we categorize them of the boxes 10 or under, the number of boxes 50 and over is a very small number right now. And so how you take up those bigger boxes with a bigger tenant, there aren't a lot of alternatives. Good news is there are a number of alternatives that I think, at least what we see from the surrounding states, that are available, but they aren't available to Wisconsin yet. We hope they'll come here, but it's still going to be that matching of size to, the particular box.
Yeah, well, that is good news.
So, Tom, when you look at this, are there traps that you see developers falling into when they look at, costly items which owners maybe don't consider when they're looking at re-tenanting an existing building? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I think what's interesting, and it kind of comes to everything kind of ties together. With the limited amount of folks that are coming into some of these boxes, you have landlords that are really struggling with a lot of vacancies. So I think what can happen is, as we all know in this business, it always goes between a power shift between the tenants and the landlord. And I think when there's a lower supply of tenants, there tends to be more they have more cards, I guess, to deal at that point in time. And a lot of them come to the table asking for some very onerous, specifically co-tenancy clauses. And, so on one side, you have owners and developers that are in a position where they have to fill space, and they feel, and on the other side, you get tenants who are pressuring them into, like I said, these onerous clauses where down the road they can be very, very harmful and very, detrimental to what's happening with these shopping centers. I think an example of that is, over the past couple of months, two of the largest developers in the world, in Simon and Brookfield Properties, are making a bid to buy JCPenney. I mean, they're not doing that for for the volumes of sales. I mean, that's clearly a play for them to mitigate co-tenancy clauses in their shopping centers. So that the smaller retailers and the mid retailers who are tied to co-tenancy to the anchors, they don't kick into co-tenancy, which puts the whole project underwater. So again, these are things that sometimes you have the ability to negotiate out, sometimes you don't. But it definitely can be something that hurts you, down the road. And that also kind of ties into exclusives too. A lot of when the deal starts, there's always a lot of asks on the exclusives. Down the road, you know, and it's always a tough thing, because when you negotiate those things 10 years ago, we don't know who the retailers are going to be. And a lot of times, you know, as you're negotiating these leases, you don't know what's going to happen, and you may be negotiating yourself down the road. So I would say those are, you know, those are two real primary things that, you know, can be troublesome from a landlord standpoint. So, but please, enough of you guys asking me questions. Let's get this back to you guys. So, Dave, let's go back to costs, and I want to talk specifically about union labor. Can you guys, or can you tell me a little bit about, you know, how union labor affects the pricing, and then also, you know, where you're gonna run into, where you're not gonna run into it?
Yeah, I think actually Wisconsin, I think we're fairly fortunate. You know, we have a state that's much more open than if we go down to Illinois. Much different environment, although modifying even in Illinois. Somewhat different when we go up to Minneapolis. But, you know, historically, there's been a pretty good blend of union, non-union trades in Wisconsin. You know, we will get certain projects in certain sizes, but, you know, when we were doing 84 South, it was very much there's a very large, prominent, visible project sitting right on the freeway. But it was a project that was very much from day one an open shop mixed. We had a great blend in terms of union and non-union trades working side by side. And I think Wisconsin is somewhat unique in that, in that it is a very smooth, but quite frankly, is, you know, not only compatible in terms of getting along, but also compatible from a dollars and cents standpoint. At least in our retail environment, where it is not, we're not building high rise, we're building single story for the most part, and you know, we don't see the differential from a trade cost standpoint as much as we do in other communities. If I go down to Chicago and I want to buy electrical, I can see 10 to 20% differences between electrician of union and non-union, literally on a proposal. We come to Milwaukee, we really don't see, you know, it could be a union or a non-union electrician. It's more a function of size relative to the project requirement that we see than it is, are they union, non-union? So in that standpoint, we've been fortunate that there is that flexibility here in the state.
You know, and I guess, yeah, on a related question to that, you know, under the Walker administration, we became a right to work state. How did that affect things for you?
Probably made it even more flexible in that regard. You know, we don't have a requirement that if it's, you know, on a TIF supported job, if I go to a TIF supported job in Illinois, I have to ask that question of, do I have prevailing wage? Do I have, you know, is this going to have to be an all union job or at least a reporting job? I don't have that same question to ask up in the state of Wisconsin. And so, at least in the private sector. So in that regard, you know, it created an even higher degree of flexibility from a trade standpoint.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no more prevailing wage. Wisconsin got rid of it in late 2017.
So that's a plus.
Yeah. All right, guys. You know, we're just about at a half hour. I got one more question. I'm going to kind of direct it to both of you, and it has to do with, we've talked a lot about the glut of additional boxes, specifically large boxes that we now have in the inventory. And you know, we're seeing less and less tenants that are available to take these things. But when you do finally, you know, are able to match these boxes up, what are you guys seeing from some of the hurdles, specifically on these big boxes, to try to get deals done?
Well, for me, on my end, you know, if I'm taking a box and I'm retenanting it, one of the biggest hurdles is the frontage, how much width the tenants want, and trying to put them in there. If there's a 75 or 100,000 foot box, I can tell you, at least on my end, we've rarely been able to retenant it and use all 75 or 100,000 square feet. So the other thing is, you know, it's a big factor is how much each tenant wants for their frontage. So you got to figure out how many tenants you can get in and frontage you have there. Having, like Dave said before, having that extra depth doesn't do anything for anybody. That's part of it. We did a deal in Racine where we took the old JCPenney box. It was a 2-story box. We didn't even factor in the second floor. We just made the deal work based on the first floor economics. So, those are the hurdles. You just got to make sure that the numbers work, the boxes work, the frontages work, of what each tenant works. And that can really figure out how many tenants you can put into a building to make it work for you.
Okay, I think David hit a lot of the key points. Depth is a question we always are asking. We ask loading docks in terms of how is everybody going to access from a delivery standpoint. We look, a lot of times we'll talk with our clients about the sequencing of tenants in a building because there are variations in terms of what different retailers are willing to accept as far as utilities passing through their space. And so little things that people don't think about in terms of where is the landlord's sprinkler room going to be isolated, or where's the electrical going to come in, or how do I source? I've got a 300-foot deep building, but the sanitary came in from the front originally, and it was never put behind the building. And now I've got multiple tenants that want to have all of their restrooms at the back of the building, and they each want to have their own sanitary line. So when we're looking at the multi-tenanting of a building, those are some factors that people haven't really taken into consideration. Height of tenants. There's a wide variation in terms of retailers, in terms of what they want their prototypical face to be. They can range from, hey, they're fine at 26 feet tall to they want to be 42 feet tall. That relative to the height of the existing building and what snow lights might do on top of the building. Now, we've just gotten done doing a split on a Kmart in Ames, Iowa. And in this case, they took the depth situation and put 2-level storage in the back half of the building. So we've actually taken a 100,000 square foot building and turned it into 50,000 square feet of retail and 90,000 square feet. This is a 95,000 square foot building, 90,000 square feet of public storage, climate controlled in the rear of the building. Demand said, it was a university town, that it was going to be the demand there for that. So, a lot of this is going to take just creativity and a willingness to look even beyond retail at times as to how are you going to use part of that box and what's going to be acceptable within in an area. So some of the other factors that we see come into play, though, are site aspects, because everybody typically thinks that all of the site is put in, I don't have any money to spend there. That may or may not be correct, because you may have to be going out there and tenants are going to say, I'm sorry, you're fully repave this parking lot or we're not move in, or that site lighting that was good enough 20 years ago, it needs to be brought up to LED and needs to be boosted in terms of the foot candles on the site to be able to match. And so it's really looking around not only the detail of what does it cost to go inside the space and build it, but what's it going to cost to divide it, new facade, dock it, and light it, and have the amenities that the retailers do. So we strongly recommend it. We spend a lot of our time looking with clients, trying to take what are all those factors going to entail as you go in. It's not just the simple cost of what's the interior cost, but it's making it ready for those interiors. And so that's the opportunity, though, in being able to create.
No, absolutely. And look, we only hear the negative stories and and the negative outlooks, but all of us have been through different downturns and different shifts in the economy, and I think all of us are cautiously optimistic that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. I don't think any of us think that we're anywhere near the bottom at this point in time, because there's going to continue to be a lot more fallout as we read about other retailers that continue to struggle. But but I think this is all really good information, very, very insightful. So I really appreciate both all the questions, and I appreciate all the feedback that you guys have put in. That brings us, I guess, to the next part of the segment of this. We don't have any more of the program to put together. We now would open it up to any questions from the audience. And I apologize, I'm trying to look at the side of my screen here to see if Tracy, can you hear? Are you going to be asking those questions, or how do we handle the next segment of this? And I guess and I guess I would apologize to the audience, because I Well, here she comes. There she is.
Sure. I always have questions that I can offer up. So, and thanks for dealing with some of the audio issues here. When you're not speaking, just make sure to put your microphone on mute there. You guys talked about adaptive reuse. You talked a lot about construction costs. And you talked about, countrywide, what you're seeing. What are the chances that you would see more movement into maybe residential construction in terms of, the commercial guys getting into that space, or there becomes some sort of merger in that aspect?
David, you want to take that one first, or?
Well, we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing that the malls, especially the interior malls, a lot of them are going to be torn down, reused. We're seeing apartment developers really looking at that end. Like we've all talked about, there's probably way too many boxes out there. The apartment market, it seems to be hot, and that seems to be a very good adaptive reuse for many situations and many centers. We're seeing that a lot. We're seeing in Racine, for instance, we're seeing that because of Foxconn. A bunch of apartment developers are looking out down there. So I think that will happen as these big boxes are old, and have lost their functional use. I think you will see more apartments going in there.
And Tracy, I'll just chime in a little bit too. It's going to all focus a little bit on demand, like everything else, and it's just going to be interesting to see just how the next generation of people are going to want to live and exist, and whether it's the millennials and they want to be in a more urbanized setting and close to retail, or it's the empty nesters. I guess I'm still. It becomes a bit of a quandary to me when I still see all these apartments continue to go up, and like David says, that the market seems hot, and on the flip side, there's a residential boom right now of new houses going up. So I'm just trying to understand, where everybody's going, because it just seems like single family homes are still incredibly strong, and yet there's a desire for people to move into urban areas, into apartment buildings. So unless we're just reproducing that quickly, I'm not sure where all the demand is coming from.
Well,
and we're already seeing the question being asked, and I wonder too, Tom, in terms of where do you put all these apartments, or where all the people come from that fill them? But we've got 2 or 3 mall type settings, but they aren't the A mall, they aren't the B mall. It is that C mall that's referenced, where it's a 300,000 square foot mall that probably has 100 to 150,000 square feet of retail that could legitimately be put there, but it's got all this parking lot area. And it's got, and so we see a couple developers already looking at tearing down half the mall, populating it with what's available, creating outlots, and then putting multifamily and hotels. So we are already seeing that. And from our standpoint, we're having to adapt from a construction standpoint, where we said we always build retail, but we're looking now and saying we better be ready to build other things that are going to go on retail properties, because we're seeing it happen just immediately as a pivot occurring.
Well, and what you're really speaking to is the ability for, good contractors and good practitioners to be able to handle any type project. And, as you mentioned, you're seeing industrial uses, office uses, retail uses, and residential uses all on the same plot, all in the same area. We do have a question, and this gets more into the retail side. Talking about the Main Street corridors, what the future of these strips look like, and perhaps this speaks to more of that urban or downtown / Main Street / suburban focus, what you're seeing, and really where you're seeing the demand and where you're seeing the opportunity for work. Is this tear down and reconstruct, or more adaptive?
Well, I'll go first, because I don't know if I necessarily understand the question as much. Are you asking what the demand will be for, more, urban edge, whether it's retail stuff? If that's the question, I guess, I've always been, I think it's always been a population situation, and I've always seen so many whether it's different municipalities, try to integrate these types of developments in there. And and I would say it's a mixed bag of success. Typically, if you don't have a very dense urban population, you really can't support retail, and you really can't support the other ancillary things that kind of go along with it. That's why it works in in the Chicagos, the Manhattans, but when you try to do it in a smaller community, specifically from the retail standpoint, I mean when you put a complex together, and on one side you try to sell and say, okay, there's 400 residential units. Well, it's really a nothing kind of number when you consider what David sees in his condo in downtown Chicago, where on one block they could have 3,000 people. I mean, it's just it's a considerably different dynamic.
And I guess speaking to kind of the convergence of all the different asset classes or the verticals, Dave, are you getting pulled into more warehouse type situations on the construction side, or more adaptation for that last mile consideration?
We're just starting to see the questions being asked at this point. So we've got a couple client situations which I think may evolve to that, but I think it's very much at the front end of that process. But I think it's an inevitable. And one of the earlier sessions they talked about that's like throwing in the strongest competition right in chewing up retail space. And so I think there will be some hesitance to that, but I think there are some malls and I think there are some retail spaces that it ultimately has to be filled. One of the biggest challenges we talked about in that conversation is just all the traffic that it generates that isn't buying anything, and you have to have the space to accommodate a whole bunch of vans or a whole bunch of trucks, or so there is conceptually there's a different thing to address than what you normally address on a retail property. And so I think it's not going to be every box that fits and says, boy, that's going to be a great, last mile sort of location. They're going to have some special, from a traffic standpoint, they're going to have to be geared for a different sort of traffic than what has been historically set for retail. So it's coming. I'm just not sure which properties are going to fit it from what we can see so far.
But there are also these limiting issues on that too. You're going to find municipalities are not going to want to see warehouses in shopping center areas and retail areas. So that's another thing you have to take into consideration.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, especially as we see so much interest in some of these logistics companies. You talk about an Amazon looking to be in more densely populated areas. Is that something that they're going to have to reconfigure their construction footprint or their design footprint? And what are the economics of it? So I'm thinking though of a store like a Best Buy, for example. I mean, I don't have any insight specifically, but their whole rise to success has been, through this pandemic, has been the fact that they've been able to basically facilitate, pickup. And isn't that a model that other retailers would want to replicate in the future, or at least consider?
I think it's one that others may, but I think Best Buy was, right place, right time. In terms of they're in somewhat expansion mode. We see them as somebody who's looking for space in at least a couple situations where they've succeeded. But it does create, and I think we will see some modifications for retailers that they now have to provide for curbside pickup. That's going to change logistically what we normally thought of for a box. We didn't think they wanted cars to be able to pull up at the front door, not like a grocery pickup or whatever. Well, that may change in some of the models. And so it may have some implications as to just from a design and construction standpoint as to how and where they locate. But as I say, Best Buy was in, Tom, I don't know what you've seen, but Best Buy seemed to be in a unique, ready to hit the ground running when the COVID hit.
Yeah, and they've handled the storm pretty well from that standpoint. But you're right. I mean, it was just those that were ready to be able to adapt. And I think their product lended itself well to do that.
It also begs another question about grocery. I mean, there's grocery, of course, is the has been very strong, or most grocers have remained very busy. But they were never set up for this, right? I mean, I pull up in front of the store, I pick up my grocery, somebody brings it out. What are you seeing, or what are you hearing from some of those new developments? Whether it's a discount grocer or a new grocer, are they changing their design?
We've not seen major design changes at this point. I think there are some new grocery concepts coming out. Stay tuned as to, I think if they can ever figure out how to make money at the same time at delivering groceries or whatever, I think the pickup is probably the stronger model than a delivery sort of scenario. I would think there's going to have to be some adjustments to the store itself in accommodating that secondary pickup side or whatever. We've seen some design that go that way, but a little early to tell exactly how that's all going to adapt. But there are certainly the expansion from Aldi's, and there are several grocers that are really pushing hard, but I don't see Aldi's as we're seeing them changing their design, particularly as we're seeing them go in adjacent to other retail developments we're involved with.
Yeah, and I think, from a positive standpoint, COVID hit the grocers at a really good time, because they were all getting ready to compete with whether, I don't know who was first at this, whether it was Target or Walmart with the tap and order, then have it delivered. I remember Sendix had a big push to go ahead and do that. A lot of the grocers were already set up to try to do this, and then when this thing hit, they were really ready to implement things that processes that they had been working on for quite a while.
One final question before I get to the final question. Just talking about relevant retailers, Kohl's just announced their move to a smaller footprint and to basically find another use or another occupant for that excess space. Are you seeing that as a strategy moving forward for other retailers?
You've seen it already. Burlington's downsizing. There used to be 60, 70,000 feet. They're downsizing to 25, 23,000 feet. I think you're going to see that a lot. The retailing industry, between the pickups, between the internet, Amazon, all those different outlets, I think you're going to definitely see people take less space, and try and release the space or subdivide the space to see if they can bring their operating costs down.
And retailers have always been tweaking their site plans. I mean, there's nothing new in the fact of them, going smaller, going larger, and it comes down to occupancy cost. And who knows? I mean, if we get to the point where I think everybody on this panel agrees that there's, right now we have too much retail space or too much large box space, maybe if that drives the pricing down, retailers will make a decision that it is, it's cost effective to take more space. You never know. I mean, ultimately, there's a fine point as to what sales they want to do per square foot, and that dictates a lot of it.
Well, and you also see adjustments where retailers, to your point, Tom, retailers may look and say this is in part a sales store, walk in, but this is in part a distribution center. And so I think you have the potential to see those mixed. And we've got a couple large Office Maxes that have survived far longer as a full-size Office Max as they've downsized other stores, but it's a great distribution point. So it's half and half in that regard. I think we'll see others. Kohl's has got a little bit different challenge, though, because they're downsizing their own box at that point, saying they're going to still stay on as a 60,000 square foot tenant in an 80,000 square foot box. We think this is a churn and burn sort of scenario, but we think one of the drivers from our business standpoint is the fact we're going to see over the next 2-3 years a number of retailers, as they are downsizing, relocating. They don't have to worry about it. It's not their box. Their lease is up. They're going to go somewhere else. Or, cut my rent here. I'll stay the same size. But one way or the other, they're going to trim their dollars. And so much of what I'm sure we're looking at right now are relocations as opposed to fresh new sites and an increase in count for retailers. So you really got a couple different scenarios, and Kohl, that's part of Kohl's challenge. They've been looking for a while for finding who's going to fit the rest of their space, and that's a different scenario than when you can control and just go somewhere else on your own. So,
And thank you. One final question for all of you, and we're going to keep this real short. Looking forward, 21, 22, what are you most optimistic about when it comes to retail, real estate, and construction? Let's start with Dave. Oh, he was the one that looked, you were looking up for the answer.
thanks a lot. I think we're going to see some pent up demand, whether that demand is going to be the second half of 21 or the second half of 22 as a pure business outlook from our standpoint. From a retail standpoint, I think retail still has life. I would agree with some of the other panels that, retail isn't dead. It's going to have to be willing to pivot. It's going to have to be willing to adapt. And collectively, all of us dealing with it are going to have to be willing and able to adapt with it. So that's going to be the challenge, but I think it's the opportunity for those that are creative. I think there are going to be opportunities to do business out there. Just we're going to have to adjust as we go.
Great. David.
I agree with you. I think they're going to have to adapt as well. I was kind of surprised to see coming out of COVID, in the last month or two, there was a tremendous amount of activity that I hadn't seen for a long time. So I think the retailers are looking to do some things to try and get back in right now, maybe because there's better opportunities, maybe because, the rents per se, maybe they feel like they're king and they can drive a deal better. The other thing I think going forward is I think for a while, I think interest rates are going to be very low. And I think that's going to help the entire industry and try and help make deals go forward as well.
Great. Final thoughts, Tom?
I've been from the start of this thing. I've been bullish the fact that human beings are social creatures, and they're going to come back in droves. I will say that I'm going to stick with that, even though there's a lot of things that are pointing to the fact that people have been a lot more apprehensive coming out of their holes and and coming back to to traditional retail and things like that. But I've always said that we're fortunate enough to be handling the most, some of the most important real estate, the stuff that's on good corners, the stuff, high traffic areas. And the bottom line is something always has to happen with this real estate. So, so as long as we're involved in this and we continue to be creative and, put our thinking caps on, something's just always going to happen with this, no matter what, the retail is going to continue to change. It always has changed. So for those of us that, continue to be in this business, especially, the young people, I'm always, very bullish on the fact that as long as you're willing to work hard and be creative, there's always going to be something that we're going to be able to do with this real estate.
Perfect. Well, I think that was a great way to end the session. Thank you, Tom, David, and David. Stay tuned. In just a few minutes, we are going to have our next session starting at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time on convenience stores. Thank you.